How do you define mechanical tension? It has been said it is the primary driver of hypertrophy, but what counts as mechanical tension that stimulates hypertrophy adaptation? I mean, even 5 pounds is a mechanical load, right?
Even 0 pounds on Earth is a mechanical
Gravity
load.
is a load. Yeah.
I'm going to try to be succinct in this because I could go off. Mechanical tension at its most root level is a process called mechanotransduction, where we're actually taking the stimulus at the fiber level, actually at the sarcomere level, and that is inducing signaling cascades that result in hypertrophy. And I think a better way of thinking of it is just, black and white, there's either mechanical tension or not, is the degree of mechanical tension that is required to induce a sufficient stimulus for you to grow. So for someone who is sedentary and only gets 2,000 steps and is not active at all, going on a walking program has been shown in some cases to be a sufficient mechanical stimulus to actually induce hypertrophy. So, likewise, the fastest way to lose muscle that we have on record is leaving a gravity well. We see pretty substantial and very quick losses of muscle mass in astronauts. We also see it in complete immobilization, where the person is unable to move. You can see really, really quick atrophy occurring. So, you are a correct question asker that mechanical tension is, instead of thinking as a thing, it should be seen as a continuum, The actual site where mechanical tension is sensed is probably a combination of the titin molecule, which is actually the big ass protein complex in the muscle, in addition to what is called costomeres, which are these lateral attachments from the muscle fiber to the surrounding epimysium, I think. That might be the wrong mesium, but I think I got that right.
I think that's right.
Yes, I killed it. So basically, the actual mechanical stretch at the smallest level in your muscle fibers, importantly, not necessarily the whole muscle level, although there could be something there as well. But that's probably more related to, if I had to guess, like stimulating tendon and bone adaptation is occurring at that level, which is why when you do a set of 25 reps to failure, you can actually get sufficient hypertrophy. It's not necessarily like the quote-unquote metabolic stress like we often think of with high rep sets. That might be playing some role, but it is actually, once you're reaching failure, the individual fibers that are fatigued are at a point where they're having to contribute more to that effort as other fibers are unable to where those individual costomeres and titin molecules in that muscle fiber are experiencing high levels of mechanical tension. So mechanical tension can be achieved with various rep ranges, so long as effort is high enough. And with high loads, effort doesn't even need to be that high. You could do 5 reps at a 5 RPE. That's still your 10 RM load. That would probably be maybe not an ideal stimulus, but something. It's still like 77, 80, 82% of 1 RM, depending on the movement and the person. So mechanical tension is basically just the process of where your muscle is experiencing the mechanotransduction. And there's a lot of other things related to that which maybe have an additive or complementary or permissive effect on hypertrophy, like the hormonal response, the metabolic stress, maybe some of the damage processes that come with it, and the downstream effects on satellite cells, or downstream effects on vascularization, microvascularization, improvements in bone density being permissive to future growth, all kinds of shit. But essentially, the initial root motivating factor that allows this growth to occur is mechanical tension, and everything else is playing a secondary or complementary role at best. And that can occur with various loads. What's the rest of the question, Andrea, after the first?
How do you define mechanical tension? What counts as mechanical tension that stimulates hypertrophy adaptation?
So I covered those two. Is there anything else in there?
It was a sum to, even 5 pounds is mechanical load, right? Like there's a question mark, but
okay,
that's pretty much it. So I think we know what it is. I guess.
Oh yeah.
I think what they're asking is like how much, how do we use it for hypertrophy if it is the goal? What's like the minimal little?
Yeah, this is why progression is important, or overload is important. In that, if you took me and I started lifting, I never went over 135 on bench, or 135 on squats, and I never went past a 5 RPE, yes, there would be mechanical tension in my fibers, but I would shrink. I would start losing size because I'm training so far from what is a sufficient stimulus for me. The amount of mechanical tension I've adapted to, or I should say the magnitude of mechanical tension and the amount of mechanical tension I've adapted to, which is where kind of volume comes into play. Because we also know that it's not just a one-off maximal isometric for 2 seconds once a week that is sufficient to induce a stimulus. It needs to be sustained, and then it also needs to be repeated with a kind of reasonable frequency, which is the interactions of volume and frequency with quote-unquote intensity. So yeah, it just needs to be progressive for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that was great. Just a couple things to add. I think sort of the way I conceptualize it, like when you look at the length tension relationship, there's like passive tension. So think of that as like whole muscle tension, or, the tension from tendon to tendon. And then you have like the active tension created by the actual cross bridging within the sarcomere. And we know like stretch mediated hypertrophy is mediated most likely from the titin molecule, like you said. And I think that's sometimes influenced by things like sarcomere length, like resting length. Like sometimes, the resting length is a little bit longer and there's less overlap. And so lengthening the muscle is going to reach a greater degree of, I guess, stretch mediated tension on that sarcomere than a sarcomere that's shorter and has more overlap to begin with. So I think and Eric, you probably know better than I do, but I think there's different kind of mechanisms between the cross bridging, like the tension sensed through cross bridging versus the tension sensed through the stretch itself. Because you can think of the stretch as like you're pulling in opposite directions, but then you add in the active tension on top of that, and you're opposing that, so there's kind of two different categories that you can sort of consider there. And active tension is obviously very important. Otherwise, stretching, like a loaded stretch just by itself would be probably, would be sufficient, and it might be additive, but having, there you go, your calf experiment. So yeah, I think that's I'm glad you brought up the progression thing, because like our threshold, think of like as you progress, like your threshold for the amount of tension that you're going to require to sort of meet that threshold to cause this mechanotransduction cascade that's going to increase over time. Is the lower threshold fibers are able to kind of shoulder more of the load as they adapt. That means the higher threshold fibers that have the greatest propensity for growth probably are going to they're going to require either additional reps or additional load to tap into those.
Well said. And we are still elucidating. When I say we, I probably shouldn't even say we, because I'm far too applied in my research.
Eric
Smarter
speaks for
people than me.
science.
I am science.
Eric is science.
Actual muscle physiologists rather than like sports scientists like me who just tell people to train and then measure whole muscle changes, are still elucidating whether or not there are additive or synergistic effects of what we call stretch mediated hypertrophy, or more traditionally resistance training induced hypertrophy. And what does it actually require? Do we need to have muscle fibers being active or not in one category versus the other? Obviously, stretch mediated doesn't seem to be. And whether they're different or not, I don't know. I was thinking about, as you were talking, Brian, like we have two different devices where we can measure someone's mid-thigh pull force output in the lab. One of them is just a chain that attaches to a strain gauge and then to a handle, and you stand on a plate and the chain is attached to the plate. So the strain gauge, which is being pulled apart, is measuring in newtons the force that you are applying, but it's still the same amount of newtons, still force, right? A force plate, however, it has load cells in the plate that can measure your ground reaction force, I guess compression in this case. So it's, I would think, because we're not just a simple load cell or strain gauge, but more so we have like little strain gauges and load cells at a very small level inside our muscle, that they could be additive, they could be different. And, you know, we see some other adaptations that make you think they might be, like changes in sarcomeres in series when you do like loaded stretching in animal models, or when you train at longer muscle lengths versus shorter, and different regional hypertrophy. So I think there's at least enough of a mechanistic rationale to think that they could be potentially additive, which is the whole reason why, for those who've paid attention to my YouTube lives and me on Iron Culture, why I'm playing around with a hour-long calf stretch on a day-to-day basis, except for 1 day a week, while also doing calf training to see if that results in, you know, hypertrophy in the calves beyond what my normal change was. So yeah, anyway, big question mark, long answer to a short question, but cool stuff to come in the future.
Yeah. So if we were to short answer, would it be like, you're right, question asker, anything is mechanical tension, kind of, but when you ask what counts as mechanical tension that stimulates hypertrophy, it's simply like, what have you adapted to? And are you doing at least that much or more? Correct?
You don't even need me, Brian. That was the most straightforward answer.
I'm going to do this whole podcast in 5 minutes after.
That was good.
Just trade harder.
Oh, thanks, y'all.